The cauldron's steam rose into the dry Arizona air as Natalia Norton stirred the thick mixture of lye and tallow, watching the soap begin to take form under the relentless sun of Ash Fork in the summer of 1882. She had been alone for 3 years now, ever since the fever took her father and left her with nothing but this small patch of land and the skills he had taught her for survival. The rhythmic motion of stirring had become meditation, a way to quiet the loneliness that crept in during the long desert days when the only sounds were the wind through the sagebrush and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. She was 24 years old and had resigned herself to a life of solitude, selling soap and herbs to the townspeople, keeping to herself, asking nothing of anyone. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up from her work. A rider approached slowly, his silhouette wavering in the heat shimmer that rose from the sun-baked earth. Natalia straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, one hand instinctively moving toward the rifle she kept propped against the porch post. Strangers could mean trouble, and a woman living alone had to be careful. As the rider drew closer, she could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty brown hat and a faded blue shirt that had seen better days. His horse was a sturdy chestnut mare that looked well cared for despite the trail dust coating her flanks. When he was close enough, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of long days under the sun. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-blue, and they held a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from dust and disuse. "Name's Dalton Emerson. I don't mean to intrude, but I saw your homestead from the ridge and was hoping I might water my horse. Been riding since dawn and we're both about done in." Natalia studied him for a long moment. He did not have the look of a drifter or a troublemaker. His hands rested easy on the saddle horn, making no move toward the gun at his hip. There was something honest in his face, a directness in his gaze that made her nod slowly. "There's a trough around back," she said, gesturing with the wooden stirring paddle still in her hand. "Help yourself." "Much obliged," he said, but he did not move immediately. His eyes had settled on the cauldron and the soap taking shape within. "That's quite an operation you've got there." "It keeps me fed," Natalia replied, turning back to her work. She heard him dismount and lead his horse around the side of the small adobe house her father had built with his own hands. The stirring required constant attention at this stage, and she focused on the texture, feeling for the moment when the mixture would be just right. When Dalton Emerson appeared again, walking around to the front of the house, he was carrying his canteen. "Would you mind if I filled this as well? I can pay you for the water." "Water's free," Natalia said. "I'm not going to charge a man for what falls from the sky." A smile crossed his face, transforming it from merely weathered to something approaching handsome. "Not much falling from this sky lately," he observed, looking up at the cloudless expanse of blue. "This drought's got everyone worried." "The well's still good," she said. "Deep enough that it hasn't run dry yet." He nodded and disappeared again. Natalia found herself stirring more slowly, listening to the sounds of him moving around her property. There was something comforting about having another person nearby, even a stranger. She had not realized how much she missed simple human presence until this moment. When Dalton returned, he stood a respectful distance away, watching her work. "My mother used to make soap," he said after a while. "She passed when I was 15. Watching you brings back memories." "I'm sorry for your loss," Natalia said, the automatic response of someone who understood grief intimately. "It was a long time ago," he replied, "but some things stay with you." He paused, then added, "You out here alone?" The question could have been threatening, but something in his tone made it sound like genuine concern. Natalia nodded. 3 years now. That's a long time for anyone to be alone, Dalton said quietly, especially in country like this. I manage, she said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. I don't doubt it, he said quickly. Didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just that this valley, it's got potential. Good water, decent grazing, protection from the worst of the wind. Seems like it could support more than just soap making. Natalia stopped stirring and looked at him fully. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Emerson? He met her eyes steadily. I'm not sure yet, he said honestly, but I've been riding for 3 months looking for a place to settle. Left Colorado after my brother and I lost our ranch to debt. He went east with his family, but I couldn't stomach the thought of city life. Been searching for somewhere that feels right. He gestured around at the landscape, the small but sturdy house, the garden she had coaxed from the reluctant soil. This feels right. This is my land, Natalia said firmly. I know that, Dalton replied. I wasn't suggesting otherwise. He fell silent for a moment, then said something that would change everything. I was thinking more along the lines of a partnership. You've got the land and the water. I've got ranching skills and a strong back. Between the two of us, we could build something real here. You don't even know me, Natalia said, but her heart had begun to beat faster. The loneliness she had been holding at bay suddenly felt overwhelming. That's true, Dalton acknowledged, but I know a hard worker when I see one. I know courage when I see someone living alone in rough country, and not just surviving but making a go of it. And I know desperation when I feel it in myself, the need to put down roots somewhere before I turn into nothing but dust and tumbleweeds. The soap had reached the right consistency. Natalia carefully poured it into the wooden mold she had prepared, her hands steady despite the turmoil in her thoughts. When she finished, she set down the paddle and looked at Dalton Emerson, this stranger who had ridden into her life with a proposition that terrified and tempted her in equal measure. I don't know you, she repeated, and I don't make hasty decisions. I wouldn't respect you if you did, he said. How about this? I noticed your fence needs mending on the western side and that roof has some loose tiles. Let me do some work around the place for a few days. Give us both time to take each other's measure. I'll camp down by the creek, stay out of your way. No obligations on either side. If at the end of a week you want me gone, I'll ride out and you'll never see me again. It was a reasonable offer, perhaps too reasonable. Natalia knew she should refuse, send him on his way, maintain the careful isolation that had kept her safe. But safety and living were not always the same thing, and she was so tired of being alone. 1 week, she heard herself say, and you keep your distance. Yes, madam, Dalton said, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. That first day set the pattern for the ones that followed. Dalton made camp down by the creek as promised, far enough away to be proper but close enough to be useful. He rose with the sun and worked until dark, repairing fence posts, fixing the roof, clearing brush that had overgrown the irrigation ditches. Natalia continued her routine, making soap, tending her garden, but she found herself watching him work, noticing the competent way he handled tools, the gentle manner he had with his horse. On the second day, she brought him lunch, a simple meal of bread and cheese and cold beans. He thanked her with genuine gratitude, and they ate in companionable silence, sitting on opposite ends of a fallen log. Tell me about Colorado, she said finally. Dalton wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Not much to tell that isn't common. My brother Derek and I inherited a small ranch from our father. We worked it for 5 years, built it up to something respectable. Then we had 2 bad winters in a row. Lost most of the herd. Borrowed money to restock, but the market crashed before we could sell. The bank took everything. His voice was matter of fact, but she could hear the pain underneath. Derek had a wife and 2 little ones. He needed stability, so he took them to St. Louis where his wife's people could help. I couldn't do it. Couldn't go back to working for someone else in some cramped city. So I took my horse and my gear and headed south. "How old are you?" Natalia asked. 27, he said. "You?" 24, he nodded slowly. 3 months of drifting taught me something. A man alone is only half alive. I need a purpose, a place to belong. I don't mean to be forward, Miss Norton, but I think maybe you know something about that feeling. She did, of course. That was what made his presence both comforting and dangerous. He was offering her something she had thought she would never have again, hope for a future that was more than mere survival. On the 3rd day, a dust storm blew in from the west. Natalia was checking her soap molds when the sky began to darken with the approaching wall of brown. She had time to secure the animals and cover the soap before the wind hit with full force, driving sand through every crack and crevice. She retreated into the house, closing the shutters against the stinging grit. Through the howling wind, she heard pounding on her door. When she opened it, Dalton stood there, covered in dust, squinting against the driving sand. "Can't stay down by the creek," he shouted over the wind. "The tent won't hold." She stepped back without hesitation, and he stumbled inside. She slammed the door behind him, dropping the bar into place. The house went dim with only the faint light filtering through cracks in the shutters. Dalton stood dripping dust onto her clean floor, and she found herself laughing at the absurdity of it. "I'll get you some water to wash with," she said. The storm lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. They had no choice but to share the space, moving around each other carefully in the small house. Natalia made coffee on her stove, and they sat at her rough-hewn table, listening to the wind shriek around the walls. "Your father built this place well," Dalton observed. "Not a leak anywhere." "He was a good man," Natalia said. "Taught me everything he knew, how to work the land, how to make do with what you have, how to stand on your own feet. Sounds like he loved you very much." "He did," she agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "After my mother died giving birth to a baby brother who didn't survive, it was just the 2 of us. We took care of each other. Must have been hard when he passed. It was like losing half of myself," Natalia admitted. She had not spoken of this to anyone, but somehow the words came easier in the dim light with the storm raging outside. "I didn't know if I could manage alone. Those first few months, I nearly gave up a dozen times. But then I'd remember something he taught me, or I'd look at something he built with his hands and I'd find the strength to keep going." Dalton was quiet for a long moment. "You're stronger than you know," he said finally. "Most people would have sold up and moved to town." "This land is all I have of him," Natalia said. "I couldn't let it go." As darkness fell, the storm finally began to ease. Dalton stood, stretching his back. "I should check if there's anything left of my camp." "You can sleep in here," Natalia said, then quickly added, "I'll take the bed, you can have the floor. It's not right to send you back out there tonight." She expected him to argue, to insist on propriety, but he simply nodded. "Thank you. I'll be gone at first light." That night, lying in her narrow bed with Dalton sleeping on the floor across the room wrapped in his bedroll, Natalia found herself staring at the ceiling, intensely aware of another person's breathing in her house. It had been so long since she had not been alone. The feeling was both strange and comforting. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee. Dalton was already up, had rekindled the fire in her stove and put the pot on to boil. He looked up when she emerged from behind the curtain that separated her sleeping area from the rest of the room. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "Seemed like the least I could do." "I don't mind," she said, and realized it was true. Having him there felt natural in a way that should have alarmed her but somehow did not. After breakfast, they walked the property together, assessing damage from the storm. The garden had taken a beating, several plants torn from the ground. Dalton's tent was a tattered ruin tangled in the bushes downstream. "I can make do with my bedroll," he said, surveying the damage. "Weather's warm enough." But that night, without discussion, he laid out his bedroll on her floor again. And the next night. By the fifth day, it seemed natural that he would eat his meals at her table, that they would share the evening sitting on her porch watching the sun set over the valley. "You never told me where you came from originally," Dalton said one evening as they watched the sky turn gold and orange and finally purple. "My father brought us out from Ohio when I was 10, Natalia said. "He wanted space, freedom, a chance to build something of his own. My mother was not sure about it, but she loved him enough to follow him anywhere. You look like her, people used to say so. Dark hair, brown eyes. She was taller though, more graceful. I got my father's stocky build." "You're exactly as you should be," Dalton said quietly, and something in his tone made her heart skip. On the sixth day, a rider came from town. Natalia recognized him as Samuel Price, the owner of the general store. He pulled up his horse, looking surprised to see Dalton working on reinforcing the barn door. "Miss Norton," Samuel said, touching his hat. "I came to check on you after that storm. Wanted to make sure you were all right out here alone." "I'm fine, Mr. Price," Natalia said, very aware of Dalton standing nearby watching the exchange. Samuel glanced at Dalton, then back at Natalia, his expression curious and slightly disapproving. "I see you have company." "Mr. Emerson has been helping with some repairs," Natalia said, keeping her voice level. "I see," Samuel said in a tone that suggested he saw more than she was saying. "Well, I also wanted to let you know that Mrs. Henderson is asking if you could bring some of your lavender soap to town. Says it's the only thing that helps her skin condition." "I'll bring some next week," Natalia promised. After Samuel rode away, Natalia felt Dalton's eyes on her. "People are going to talk," he said. "Let them talk," she replied, surprising herself with the defiance in her voice. "I know the truth of what's happening here." "And what is happening here?" Dalton asked, setting down his hammer and walking toward her. Natalia felt her breath catch. "I don't know," she admitted, "but tomorrow is the seventh day." "It is," he agreed, stopping a few feet away from her. "Do you want me to leave?" She looked at him standing there in the afternoon sun, this man who had ridden into her life and somehow become essential in less than a week. She thought about the easy companionship they had developed, the way he made her laugh with dry observations about his horse's personality, the competent way he had repaired 3 years' worth of neglect around her property. She thought about going back to being alone, to the silence broken only by wind and her own voice. "No," she said. "I don't want you to leave, but I need to understand what you're asking of me." Dalton took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to give us a chance. Not just as partners working the land, though I think we could do that well. I'm asking if you'd consider building a life with me, a real life." He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "I know it's fast. I know I'm asking a lot. But out here, people can't afford to waste time dancing around the truth. I care about you, Natalia. In 1 week, you've become the most important thing in my world, and I think maybe I've become important to you too." Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he must hear it. "You are," she whispered. "But I'm scared." "So am I," he admitted. "I failed once before, lost everything I'd built. The thought of failing again terrifies me, but the thought of riding away from you tomorrow terrifies me more." Natalia took a step toward him, then another. "My father used to say that fear was just caution's way of keeping you alert, that the trick was not to let it stop you from living." "Wise man," Dalton said softly. She was close enough now to see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver starting to thread through his dark hair at the temples. Close enough to smell the honest sweat of hard work and the faint scent of sage he had been clearing earlier. Close enough to make a choice that would change everything. "Stay," she said. "Not as a hired hand or a temporary partner. Stay and let's see what we can build together." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and his fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with sudden tears. "I'll stay," he said, "for as long as you'll have me." That evening they sat later than usual on the porch, still holding hands, talking about possibilities. Dalton had ideas about running cattle in the valley, starting small and building up gradually. Natalia talked about expanding her soap making, perhaps adding candles and other goods she could sell in town or even to the mining camps in the hills. "We'd need to make it legal," Dalton said carefully. "Not just for propriety's sake, though that matters in a town like Ash Fork, but for practical reasons. If something happened to one of us, the other should have clear claim to the property." "Are you proposing to me, Dalton Emerson?" Natalia asked, her heart doing strange flutters in her chest. He turned to look at her, his gray-blue eyes serious in the fading light. "I suppose I am. Not the way a woman should be proposed to, with poetry and romance, but honestly, because it makes sense, because I think we could be happy together. Because I'm falling in love with you and I don't want to pretend otherwise." Natalia felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said. "It's terrifying and wonderful and makes no logical sense given we barely know each other." "But you feel it?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel it." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Then say yes, marry me. Let's build something beautiful in this valley." "Yes," Natalia said, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." The next day they rode into Ash Fork together. The town was small, little more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. People stared as they rode down the main street, Natalia acutely aware of the speculative looks and whispered conversations their appearance together provoked. They stopped first at the church, a simple wooden building with a cross over the door. Reverend Thomas was a kind man in his 50s who had known Natalia since she arrived in Ash Fork. He listened to their request with raised eyebrows but no judgment. "This is rather sudden," he observed. "Yes, sir, it is," Dalton agreed. "But we're both of age and sound mind. We know what we want." The Reverend looked at Natalia. "Is this truly what you want, my dear?" "You're not being pressured. It's what I want," Natalia said firmly. "I know it seems fast, but sometimes you just know when something is right." "Well," the Reverend said slowly, "I suppose I've seen stranger things in my time. When would you like the ceremony?" "As soon as possible," Dalton said. "We have a ranch to build." They settled on the following Sunday, which gave them 4 days to prepare. Natalia bought fabric from the general store to make a simple dress, ignoring Mrs. Henderson's pointed questions about the hurried nature of the wedding. Dalton purchased supplies they would need, including lumber for expanding the house and fencing for the pasture he planned to build. Saturday evening, Dalton moved his bedroll into the barn. "It's just one more night," he said when Natalia protested. "Let's do this right." She appreciated the gesture more than she could say. Despite the speed of their courtship, Dalton had been nothing but respectful, never pushing, always giving her space to think and breathe. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Natalia dressed in her new gown, a simple design in pale blue that complemented her dark hair. She had no mirror large enough to see her whole reflection, but she felt beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the hope singing through her veins. The ceremony was small. The Reverend spoke the ancient words of the marriage right while Dalton held her hands and looked at her like she was something precious and rare. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Dalton kissed her softly, chastely, but with a promise of deeper passion to come. After the ceremony, several of the townspeople offered stiff congratulations. Samuel Price was notably absent, but Mrs. Henderson surprised Natalia by pressing a jar of honey into her hands and whispering, "Be happy, dear. Life's too short for anything else." They rode back to their ranch, as the sun climbed toward noon. Natalia felt strange and new and terrified and exhilarated all at once. She was married. She had a husband. After 3 years of solitude, her life had transformed in less than 2 weeks. That night, in the privacy of their home, Dalton loved her with a patience and tenderness that made her weep with the beauty of it. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt a peace she had not known since before her father's death. "What are you thinking?" Dalton murmured against her hair. "That I'm happy," she said. "That I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again." His arms tightened around her. "Neither did I." The months that followed were hard work but joyful. They fell into a rhythm, rising before dawn to tackle the endless tasks of building a working ranch. Dalton built a larger corral and rode into the hills to negotiate with a Mexican rancher for a small herd of cattle. Natalia continued her soap making and expanded into candles as planned, finding a ready market in both Ash Fork and the mining camps. They learned each other through the daily intimacies of shared life. She discovered that he sang quietly to himself while working, old songs from his childhood. He learned that she was fierce about her independence, but softened when he brought her wildflowers from the hills. They quarreled occasionally, sharp disagreements about money or priorities, but they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and respect each other's opinions. By autumn, the ranch was beginning to take shape. They had 20 head of cattle grazing in the valley, a reinforced barn, new fences, and a garden that had yielded enough to stock the root cellar for winter. Natalia's soap business was thriving, bringing in steady money that supplemented what they would make from the cattle. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Dalton said, "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" Natalia asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I don't remember the last time I felt afraid. Not really afraid the way I was when I was drifting, not knowing where I belonged. You've given me that, Natalia. You've given me a home." She turned to look at him, seeing the truth of his words in his eyes. "You've given me the same thing," she said. "I thought I was managing alone, but I was just existing. You've taught me the difference between surviving and living." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and she felt the familiar warmth of desire kindle between them. They had been married 5 months, and the passion between them had only grown stronger with time and intimacy. Winter came, cold and harsh, testing everything they had built. There were nights when the wind howled around the house and snow piled deep, and they huddled together for warmth, grateful for each other and the tight walls that kept the worst of the weather at bay. Dalton spent long hours in the barn, making sure the cattle had feed and water. Natalia worked by lamplight, making soap and candles they would sell when the weather cleared on Christmas Eve. Dalton presented her with a gift he had been working on in secret. It was a rocking chair, beautifully crafted from pine he had salvaged and sanded smooth. "For the children," he said quietly, "when they come." Natalia felt tears prick her eyes. They had not yet spoken directly about children, though the hope for them was implicit in their plans for the future. "It's beautiful," she said, running her hands over the smooth wood. "I want to build a family with you," Dalton said. "A real family, children running around this valley, growing up strong and free the way kids should." "I want that too," Natalia whispered. In February, Natalia's monthly courses did not come. She waited, not wanting to speak of it in case she was mistaken, but when another month passed, she could no longer deny the truth. She was pregnant. She told Dalton one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then a grin spread across his face so wide it transformed him. "Truly?" he asked. "Truly," she confirmed. He let out a whoop of joy that made her laugh, then swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing and crying all at once. When he set her down, his hands were gentle on her face. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for this gift." "Thank you," she replied, "for giving me a reason to hope again." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring. Natalia continued her work, though Dalton fussed over her like a mother hen, trying to take on all the heavy lifting. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not broken, and that she needed to stay active. "I just want to keep you safe," he said, looking worried. "I know," she said gently, "but I also need to feel useful. Let me do what I can, and I promise I'll ask for help when I need it." They compromised as they had learned to do. She continued making soap and tending the garden but let him handle the heavier tasks. Together they prepared for the baby's arrival, Dalton building a cradle and Natalia sewing tiny garments from soft fabric. In June, the baby came. It was a long labor that stretched through the night and into the next day. Mrs. Henderson attended as midwife, her capable hands and calm voice guiding Natalia through the pain. When the baby finally arrived, his first cries seemed to echo through the valley. "A son," Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the squalling infant in Natalia's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Dalton, who had been pacing outside, burst into the room at the sound of crying. He stopped short when he saw Natalia holding the baby, his face transforming with wonder. "Come meet your son," Natalia said softly. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something. When he reached the bed and looked down at the tiny red face of his child, tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "He's perfect," Dalton whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after the reverend who had married them and David after Natalia's father. Thomas David Emerson, the first of what they hoped would be many children to grow up in the valley. The months after Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. Natalia had never known she could be so tired and so happy at the same time. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a fussy baby in the middle of the night, singing the same soft songs he sang while working. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Natalia felt ready to return to her soap making. They had saved some money, but the winter had eaten into their reserves and they needed to rebuild their funds. Dalton took on more of the baby care, strapping Thomas to his back while he worked around the ranch. The sight of her broad-shouldered husband with their tiny son nestled against him never failed to make Natalia's heart overflow with love. 2 years passed in this manner, filled with hard work and small joys. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He took his first steps in the garden while Natalia was checking the beans and spoke his first word, "Papa," to Dalton's absolute delight and Natalia's mock indignation. The ranch continued to grow. They now had 40 head of cattle and had added chickens and pigs. Natalia's soap business had expanded to the point where she was shipping orders to stores as far away as Flagstaff. They had added a room onto the house and built a proper workshop for Natalia's soap making. On a warm evening in late summer when Thomas was asleep and they were sitting on the porch as they had done countless times before, Dalton said, "Remember when I first rode up to this place? You were stirring soap in that old cauldron, looking so fierce and independent." "I remember," Natalia said, smiling at the memory. "I thought you were just another drifter who would be gone by nightfall." "I thought I was too," Dalton admitted. "But then I saw you stirring that soap and something in me just knew this was the place. You were the person." He paused, then added softly, "I said to myself, if she'll have me, I'll ask her to stir up a life with me in this valley." Natalia's breath caught. He had never told her this before. "Did you really?" "I did," he confirmed. "It was the craziest thought, considering I'd just met you. But it was also the truest thing I'd ever felt." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers as he had done that first time. "And now look at what we've stirred up together. A home, a family, a future." "It's more than I ever dreamed of," Natalia said, her voice thick with emotion. "When my father died, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd just exist day after day until I eventually died too. But you showed me I was wrong. You taught me that it's never too late for a new beginning." "We taught each other," Dalton said. "You showed me that failure isn't the end. That a man can lose everything and still find a reason to hope again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called and one of the cattle lowed softly. These were the sounds of their life, familiar and dear. "I'm pregnant again," Natalia said suddenly. Dalton turned to her, surprise and joy warring on his face. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I was with Thomas," she confirmed. "I'm about 2 months along, I think." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "God, I love you," he murmured. "I love the life we've built. I love watching you be a mother. I love everything about this existence we've created together." "I love you too," she said. "More than I thought it was possible to love another person." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Natalia knew what to expect. She worked steadily through the months, and Dalton made sure she never overdid it. Thomas seemed to sense that something was changing, becoming more clingy and wanting to be near his mother more often. In March, as the desert was beginning to shake off winter and prepare for spring, Natalia's second child was born. This time the labor was shorter, and when Mrs. Henderson placed the baby in her arms, Natalia looked down at a daughter with dark eyes and a cap of black hair. "A girl," she said wonderingly. "We have a daughter." Dalton, who had refused to leave the room this time, sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his daughter with the same wonder he had shown Thomas. "She's beautiful," he said hoarsely. "She looks just like you." They named her Grace, for the grace they had both been given in finding each other, and Lily, for the wildflowers that bloomed in the valley every spring. Grace Lily Emerson, tiny and perfect, with a lusty cry that announced her determination to be heard. Time continued its steady march forward. Thomas proved to be a protective older brother, fascinated by his baby sister and always wanting to help care for her. The ranch prospered, weathering droughts and hard winters, growing a little each year. Natalia's business became known throughout northern Arizona, her soaps and candles prized for their quality. When Thomas was 6 and Grace was 4, Natalia found herself pregnant once more. This third child, another boy they named Samuel Henry, came easily and seemed determined to keep up with his older siblings from birth. He had Dalton's dark hair and Natalia's brown eyes, and a smile that could light up the darkest day. The house had grown with the family, now boasting 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a spacious living area where they gathered in the evenings. Dalton had built a school room where Natalia taught the children their letters and numbers. In the summer, a traveling teacher stayed with them for 2 months, supplementing their education and bringing news from the wider world. Years flowed like water, each bringing its own challenges and joys. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and build. He loved working with the cattle and spent long hours in the saddle, learning everything Dalton could teach him about ranching. Grace was bright and curious, with a talent for drawing that surprised them all. She filled pages with sketches of the valley, the animals, her family. Samuel was the wild one, always climbing something or running somewhere, keeping his parents on their toes. One autumn evening when Thomas was 16, Grace was 14, and Samuel was 10, Dalton and Natalia found themselves alone on the porch for the first time in days. The children were all occupied with their own pursuits, and the ranch work was caught up for once. "Look at what we've built," Dalton said, gesturing at the land spread out before them. The original small homestead had grown into a thriving ranch. They now ran over 200 head of cattle, had expanded their land holdings, and employed 3 ranch hands. Natalia's soap business had grown as well, now run largely by Grace, who had a talent for the work. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real," Natalia admitted. She was 46 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her face lined by sun and wind and laughter. Dalton was 49, still strong but moving a little slower, his hair more gray than brown. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up and be back in that first year after my father died, alone and struggling." "It's real," Dalton assured her, taking her hand as he had done countless times over their 22 years of marriage. "Every day, every challenge, every joy, it's all real. We made it real together." "You ever regret it?" Natalia asked. "Stopping here, tying yourself to me and this valley instead of seeing what else might have been out there?" Dalton turned to look at her fully, his gray-blue eyes as intense as they had been that first day. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, everything I didn't even know I needed. This life we've built, our children, this land, it's more than I deserve." "You deserve it all," Natalia said softly. "You're the best man I've ever known." They sat quietly, holding hands as the sun set over the valley that had become their world. Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing about something, the sound as precious as anything on earth. "Remember what I said that first day?" Dalton asked. "About stirring up a life together in this valley." "I remember," Natalia said. "I didn't know then what I was really asking," Dalton continued. "I thought I was talking about a ranch, about practical matters of survival and prosperity, but it turned out to be so much more than that. We've stirred up love and family and legacy. We've created something that will last beyond us." "We have," Natalia agreed. She thought about the soap she still made, the same way her father had taught her, the same way she had taught Grace. She thought about the land, cared for and improved, that would pass to their children and their children's children. She thought about the love that had started as a tentative hope and had grown into the foundation of everything good in her life. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Dalton asked. "For stopping that day. For having the courage to ask me to build a life with you, for every day since then." "Thank you for saying yes," he replied. "For taking a chance on a drifter with nothing but a horse and a dream, for building this beautiful life with me." They kissed then, a kiss that held 22 years of love and commitment, of struggles overcome and joys shared. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Come on," Dalton said, standing and pulling her up beside him. "Let's go inside. I hear Grace made pie for dessert, and if we don't hurry, Samuel will eat the whole thing." They walked into the house together, hand in hand, as they had done everything for more than 2 decades. Inside, their children waited, arguing good-naturedly about how to divide the pie. The lamplight was warm and golden, spilling out through the windows into the gathering darkness. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had stirred up together in the valley, and it was more precious than gold. As the years continued to pass, the ranch evolved, but the love at its foundation remained constant. Thomas married a young woman from Ash Fork, a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They built a house on the eastern edge of the property and began raising their own family, giving Dalton and Natalia their first grandchildren. Grace eventually married a trader who passed through regularly on his way to Flagstaff. James was educated and kind, sharing her love of art and books. They settled in town, where Grace opened a shop selling her soaps, candles, and James's traded goods. She visited the ranch regularly, bringing her children to run through the valley where she had grown up. Samuel, true to his wild nature, became a horsebreaker, developing a reputation throughout the territory for his skill with difficult animals. He built a corral near the main house and brought horses in from all over to train. At 23, he married a spirited young woman named Catherine, who could ride as well as he could and wasn't afraid of anything. Dalton and Natalia watched their children build their own lives with pride and occasional wistfulness. The house, which had once rung with children's laughter every day, was quieter now, though never empty. Grandchildren visited regularly, and there was always something happening on the ranch. On a summer evening much like the one when they had first met, 31 years after Dalton had ridden into her life, Natalia stood stirring soap in a cauldron. They still made it the old way sometimes, outdoors over an open fire, though Grace's shop used more modern methods for larger batches. But Natalia liked the ritual, the connection to her past and her father's teachings. Dalton walked up behind her, moving a little stiffly now. They were both in their 50s, bodies marked by decades of hard work, but still strong, still capable. He watched her stir for a moment, then said, "You know, I fell in love with you doing exactly this." Natalia smiled, not stopping her rhythmic stirring. "Is that so?" "It is," he confirmed. There was something about the competence, the self-sufficiency, but also the loneliness. "I saw it in your eyes that first day, the same loneliness that was eating me alive, and I knew we could save each other." "We did save each other," Natalia agreed. She stopped stirring and turned to face him. "You gave me back my life, Dalton. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," he corrected. He moved closer, taking the stirring paddle from her hands and setting it aside. Then he did what he had done countless times over 3 decades, taking her face gently in his calloused hands. "I love you, Natalia Emerson. I have loved you since that first day, and I will love you until my last breath." "I love you too," she whispered, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks, more with every passing year. They kissed there beside the cauldron, the soap temporarily forgotten, and the love between them was as strong as it had ever been, tempered and tested by time but never broken. From the house, they heard the sound of grandchildren playing, Thomas's eldest boy chasing Samuel's youngest daughter through the yard. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together with love as their foundation. That night, lying in bed in the darkness, Dalton said, "I've been thinking about building onto the house again." "Why?" Natalia asked. "The children are all grown and gone." "For when they visit," he said. "For the grandchildren, so they have proper rooms when they stay. And maybe," he paused, then continued with a note of hope in his voice, maybe for great-grandchildren someday. Thomas and Elizabeth's oldest is already 17. Won't be long before the next generation starts. Natalia smiled in the darkness. You want to make sure there's always room for family. I want to make sure this place always feels like home to everyone who comes from our line, Dalton said. I want them to know what we built here, not just the buildings and the land, but the love, the commitment, the life we stirred up together. Then we'll build more rooms, Natalia agreed. We'll make sure there's always space for family, always room for love to grow. And they did. Over the next several years, they expanded the house one more time, adding a wing with 4 more bedrooms. The building project brought the whole family together, everyone contributing in some way. Thomas and his sons did the heavy construction. Grace designed the layout, making sure it was both beautiful and practical. Samuel procured materials through his trading contacts. The daughter-in-laws helped with the finish work, painting and decorating. When it was done, they held a celebration that lasted 3 days. Family came from all over, filling the house and the yard with noise and laughter and love. On the evening of the second day, Dalton called everyone together on the large porch they had built to accommodate gatherings. I want to say something, he announced when everyone had quieted. He stood with Natalia at his side, their children and grandchildren gathered around them. 33 years ago, I rode into this valley a broken man. I had lost everything I owned, and I thought I had lost my future as well. But then I met your mother, your grandmother, and she taught me that endings are just beginnings in disguise. He paused, looking around at all the faces turned toward him, seeing his features and Natalia's reflected in the next generation and the one after that. We built something here that I hope will last for generations. Not just a ranch, though this is a fine ranch, but a legacy of love and hard work and family. I want each of you to know that you are part of something special, something your grandmother and I created out of nothing but determination and love. Your father's getting sentimental in his old age, Natalia teased, but her voice was thick with emotion. Maybe I am, Dalton agreed. But I've earned the right. I've lived a good life, a full life, and it's all because of the woman beside me and the family we've raised together. Thomas stood, raising his glass. To my parents who showed all of us what true partnership looks like, what real love can accomplish. To Grandma and Grandpa, the grandchildren chorused, and the sound of their voices raised in unison made both Dalton and Natalia's eyes fill with tears. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own mixture of joy and sorrow. They lost friends to age and illness. The world around them changed, new technologies arriving, old ways fading. But through it all, the ranch endured, and the love between Dalton and Natalia remained constant. On a spring morning, 40 years after Dalton had first ridden into her life, Natalia woke to find him already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise. She rose and joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, looking out at the valley painted gold and pink by the dawn light. "It never gets old," Dalton agreed. "Every sunrise feels like a gift." He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart clench. "Natalia, I need you to know something." "What's that?" she asked, though she felt a flutter of fear. "I need you to know that every single day with you has been worth living. Every morning I've woken up beside you has been a blessing. If I died tomorrow, I would die a happy man because I've had 40 years of loving you." "Don't talk like that," Natalia said, but her voice shook. "We're not young anymore, love," he said gently. "We both know our time is finite. I just want to make sure you understand what you've meant to me. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me the same things, Natalia said, tears streaming down her face. You're my heart, Dalton. You always have been. They held each other there by the window, watching the sun climb higher, burning away the morning mist. They had been given a gift, 40 years of partnership and love, and they both knew it. Dalton lived another 5 years after that conversation. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the daily satisfactions of the ranch work he still did despite his age, with quiet evenings on the porch with Natalia. When he finally died, it was peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. Natalia woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still warm in hers. The funeral was enormous, people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his fairness, his kindness, and his devotion to family. They buried him on a rise overlooking the valley, where he could watch over the land he had loved so well. Natalia grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had had 45 years of marriage to a good man, had built a life and a family that would endure. She threw herself into helping with the grandchildren, teaching them the skills her father had taught her, making sure they understood where they came from. 3 years after Dalton's death, on a cold February morning, Natalia woke feeling strange. She rose and dressed, then walked outside despite the chill. She stood looking out at the valley, seeing it exactly as it had been that first day when Dalton had ridden into her life. Thomas found her there an hour later, sitting peacefully on the porch, a slight smile on her face, gone to join her husband. In her hand was an old photograph, worn from handling, showing her and Dalton on their wedding day, young and hopeful and ready to build a future together. They buried her beside Dalton, and the whole family gathered once more. Thomas, now the patriarch at 63, stood before his siblings and children and grandchildren and spoke. My parents taught us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. It's work and sacrifice and compromise, but it's also joy and laughter and partnership. They showed us how to build a life together, how to weather storms and celebrate triumphs. They left us more than land and buildings. They left us a blueprint for how to live and love well. He paused, looking out at the valley spread below them. This ranch will continue. We'll care for it and improve it and pass it on to the next generation. But more than that, we'll pass on what they taught us, about love, about family, about commitment. That's their real legacy. Years later, Thomas's great-granddaughter would stand in that same spot, preparing to marry her sweetheart. She would wear Natalia's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and carry wildflowers from the valley. As she spoke her vows, she would look out at the land. Her great-great-grandparents had built together and promised to create the same kind of enduring love in her own marriage. The house still stands in the valley, expanded over the generations, but still containing the original rooms that Natalia's father built and Dalton repaired. In the main room hangs a painting that Grace created late in her life, showing a young woman stirring soap in a cauldron while a cowboy on horseback approaches in the background. Below it is a plaque with an inscription. In 1882, Dalton Emerson rode into this valley and asked Natalia Norton to stir up a life with him. This ranch, this family, this legacy of love is the result of her saying yes. May we always remember that the greatest adventures begin with courage and faith. The soap-making tradition continues, now a thriving business run by Natalia's great-great-granddaughters, selling products across the Southwest. But once a year, on the anniversary of Dalton and Natalia's first meeting, they make soap the old way, outdoors in a cauldron, stirring the mixture while telling the story of how their family began. It is a story of chance and choice, of loneliness transformed into love, of two broken people who found each other and built something beautiful. It is a story that resonates through the generations, reminding each new member of the family that love is both a gift and a commitment, something to be cherished and nurtured and protected. The valley remains beautiful, the land still productive, the cattle still grazing on the hills. But more than the physical legacy, Dalton and Natalia left behind something intangible but infinitely more valuable. They proved that two people, working together with love as their foundation, can create something that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. They showed that endings can become beginnings, that failure can transform into success, that loneliness can blossom into love in the end. The cowboy who asked the soap maker to stir up a life with him in the valley got more than he could have imagined. He got 45 years of marriage, 3 children, multiple grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and a legacy that would endure for generations. And Natalia, who had thought her life was over when her father died, discovered that it was only beginning. Their love story became legend in Ash Fork, Arizona, passed down not just through their own family but through the community. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who thought they had lost their chance at happiness, proof that it is never too late to begin again, that love can bloom even in the harsh desert soil if tended with care and commitment. The rocking chair Dalton made that first Christmas still sits in the main house, carefully maintained, rocked by generation after generation of mothers soothing babies. The original cauldron Natalia used for soap making is displayed in the family business, a reminder of humble beginnings and the foundation on which everything else was built. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows through the valley just right, some say you can still feel their presence, the love that Dalton and Natalia created still alive in the land they nurtured and the family they raised. Their story is not just history but living memory, a testament to the transformative power of love and the beauty of two lives joined in purpose and devotion. This is how a chance encounter became a lifetime partnership. This is how loneliness transformed into family. This is how a cowboy and a soap maker stirred up not just a life, but a legacy that would echo through the ages, reminding everyone who hears the story that love, real love, built on respect and partnership and daily choice, can overcome any obstacle and create something that lasts forever.